I never thought my wedding day would turn into the moment I realized my father didn't truly support me. As the priest asked if anyone objected, my dad shouted, "Stop. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about." I'm Ava. I was nervous but excited to marry my longtime fiancé, Liam. Everything was supposed to be perfect. Guests smiled, flowers were set, music played. But a shadow had been following me all week: small arguments with my dad, strange looks, and cold remarks I had brushed off. When my dad yelled, the room went silent. Guests stared, Liam froze, and my mother looked shocked. I wanted to disappear. Later, in private, I asked him why. He said Liam wasn't the right man for me, that he didn't trust him, that he only wanted the best for me. But it wasn't concern, it was control. I felt humiliated and betrayed. I couldn't let this pass. I started paying attention to everything my dad did. I learned he had a history of trying to control people around him, manipulating situations, and creating chaos for his own satisfaction. I quietly collected proof, talked to people who had suffered under his influence, and kept calm while he thought nothing had changed. Months later, I confronted him. Calmly, I showed him what I knew: his lies, manipulations, and attempts to ruin my life. He couldn't argue. His control over me had ended. I didn't need to yell or fight. My quiet revenge was simple: I reclaimed my life. Liam and I had a private, beautiful ceremony later. My father lost his power without me doing anything cruel. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without the people who tried to hold you back. The hall went completely still after my dad's outburst. Guests looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Some murmured quietly, trying not to stare. Liam just stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly. My mother didn't move, her face pale and eyes wide, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. I felt my heart sink. Everything I had imagined for this day, the joy, the smiles, the love surrounding us, suddenly felt like it had been stolen. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run away. But I couldn't. I had to face the humiliation in front of everyone I cared about. Later, in a quiet corner, I confronted my father. I asked him why he had done it, why he had ruined this day. He hesitated, avoided my gaze, and then muttered something about past family disagreements, old grudges he couldn't let go of. I realized then that this wasn't just a moment of anger. He had planned it, let his resentment control him. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. The man I trusted most, the one who was supposed to support me no matter what, had chosen to shame me instead. Liam stood by me, confused but patient, trying to offer comfort. But even his presence couldn't erase the sting. I felt trapped in a perfect day turned nightmare. The decorations, the music, the smiles of friends, they all blurred into one memory of betrayal. I knew I couldn't ignore what had just happened. My father's actions left me feeling powerless and angry, and I silently promised myself that I would find a way to regain control and never let someone manipulate me like this again. As I sat alone later that evening, memories of the past weeks flashed through my mind. I began to notice the little things my father had done, things I had brushed off as harmless or overthinking. He made passing remarks about Liam's job, joked about his lack of ambition, and questioned his family background in ways that seemed subtle at the time. Each comment was casual, almost innocent, but together they formed a quiet, persistent pressure. I remembered the dinners where he would warn me about choosing the wrong partner, the vacations where he subtly criticized Liam's habits, and the gatherings where he'd roll his eyes whenever Liam tried to speak up. At the time, I had laughed it off, telling myself he was just protective. But now, in the harsh light of the wedding incident, I could see the pattern clearly. His jealousy had always been there, hidden under a mask of concern. My independence, my choices, my happiness, they all seemed to unsettle him. Whenever I made decisions without his approval, he found ways to make me doubt myself or question my judgment. It wasn't just about Liam. It was about control, about keeping me within a world where he dictated the terms. Looking back, I could trace the threads of manipulation throughout my life: whispered doubts, quiet criticisms, subtle shifts in his behavior whenever I tried to assert myself. Each act alone seemed insignificant, but together they painted a picture of someone determined to maintain authority over me, even at the cost of my joy. That realization hit me hard. The wedding wasn't the first time he tried to interfere, it was the culmination of years of quiet, calculated efforts to undermine me. And now, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The ceremony ground to an awkward halt. Flowers, music, and chatter all felt meaningless as the priest tried to continue, but the room was thick with tension. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether to stay or leave. My father's voice had left a mark that nothing could erase. The wedding was paused, and the joy I had imagined vanished in an instant. I needed answers. Later, I found my father alone and confronted him. I demanded to know why he had acted that way, why he chose humiliation over support. He shrugged and spoke as if it were reasonable, insisting he only wanted what's best for me. His calm words stung worse than his outburst. Every excuse felt like a shield he used to protect his pride while leaving me exposed. I felt a storm of emotions swirling inside me: anger at his betrayal, sadness that someone I trusted could behave so cruelly, and disbelief that my perfect day had been disrupted so completely. I wanted to lash out, to cry, to run, but I held myself together, knowing this wasn't just about one moment, it was about the ongoing pattern I had ignored for too long. Through it all, Liam never wavered. He stayed by my side, holding my hand, whispering that we would get through this together. His presence reminded me of the love and trust we had built, and it strengthened my determination. I realized then that I didn't need my father's approval to move forward. I could reclaim my life on my own terms, with the people who truly supported me. That clarity sparked a quiet fire inside me, a resolve to not let this betrayal define me or my future. After the chaos of the wedding, I retreated to a quiet room, shutting the world out. I needed space to think, to let the whirlwind of emotions settle. Sitting alone, I felt the weight of what had happened pressing on me. My father's actions replayed in my mind like a cruel film, each scene sharper than the last. I struggled with conflicting feelings. Part of me still wanted his approval, his love, the sense of family unity I had grown up with. But another part demanded my own happiness, my freedom to choose the life and partner I wanted. The tug-of-war between loyalty and self-preservation left me exhausted, almost paralyzed. As I reflected, a clear thought began to emerge: I could no longer allow him to dictate my choices. His control over my life had to end. This wasn't about revenge and anger, it was about reclaiming my autonomy, protecting the life I had built with Liam, and ensuring that future decisions wouldn't be overshadowed by his interference. I realized the path forward required strategy and patience. Acting impulsively would only give him more power, more opportunities to twist the situation. Instead, I needed to observe, collect, and plan carefully. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that exposing his manipulations wouldn't be public theatrics, it would be undeniable truth, laid out methodically so no one could dispute it. By the end of that evening, my resolve had strengthened. I would confront him, but on my terms. I would ensure he could no longer cast shadows over my choices. The betrayal had hurt, yes, but it had also awakened a determination I didn't know I possessed. I was ready to take control, and this time, he wouldn't have the chance to interfere. Determined to understand my father's actions, I decided to investigate quietly. I hired someone discreet, a private investigator who could uncover the truth without raising suspicion. I needed clarity, evidence, and a way to see the full picture behind his sudden outburst at the wedding. What I discovered stunned me. My father, Ronan, had spent years interfering in the lives of people close to him. He didn't just control me, he manipulated friends, relatives, even business associates. Financial decisions were influenced, opportunities were blocked, and personal relationships sabotaged, often under the guise of help or protection. His pattern was deliberate, calculated, and deeply rooted. I felt a wave of shock wash over me. It was painful to realize how far his reach extended and how many people had quietly suffered because of him. Every subtle warning, every undermining comment, every quiet warning I had dismissed suddenly made sense. He had been planning, influencing, and controlling long before my wedding, and his actions at that moment were just one small piece of a much larger pattern. But alongside the shock came an unexpected feeling: empowerment. Knowing the truth gave me strength. For the first time, I felt I held the upper hand. The evidence I had gathered could no longer be denied or brushed aside. His influence could be challenged, and I could protect my life and my marriage from his interference. I realized I wasn't powerless. The discoveries gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt before. I could plan carefully, act strategically, and expose the toxicity that had been hidden for so long. For the first time, I saw a path to reclaiming my life fully, and ensuring that my father could no longer manipulate or harm me. I knew I couldn't confront my father without preparation. I began carefully recording everything I had learned: dates, conversations, patterns, and inconsistencies. Each note, each piece of proof became a part of a growing collection that clearly showed his manipulation. I wasn't doing this to attack him in anger. I needed facts, a foundation I could rely on to protect myself and others from his control. While I organized the evidence, I realized I couldn't handle this alone. Quietly, I reached out to a few family friends I trusted, people who had experienced his interference in their own lives. They shared their stories, confirming what I had suspected for years. Their accounts gave me perspective, strength, and reassurance that I wasn't imagining his behavior. I made sure everything was documented carefully, double-checked, and stored safely. Emails, old letters, financial records, and personal accounts all formed a clear picture. The more I collected, the more I understood the depth of his control, and the more confident I felt in my ability to act decisively when the time came. At the same time, I stayed quiet around him. I didn't give any hints or show that I was aware of his long history of manipulation. He continued to act as if nothing had changed, oblivious that his actions were being recorded and that his power over me was slipping. By the end of that month, I had built a strategy rooted in evidence, not anger. I had allies, proof, and clarity. Every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to undermine my choices was accounted for. I felt ready, not to hurt him out of revenge, but to take back the control he had stolen and finally safeguard my life from his influence. I decided it was time to shift the balance. Instead of confronting my father directly, I began to use his own tactics against him, carefully and quietly. At gatherings, I asked thoughtful questions that highlighted contradictions in his stories. I made subtle comments that encouraged others to think twice about what he said. It was polite, almost casual, but every word chipped away at the image he had carefully maintained for years. Guests, initially unaware of any tension, started noticing small inconsistencies. Some whispered to each other, others exchanged knowing glances. Slowly, the picture of my father as a flawless, controlling authority began to crack. People who had once accepted his statements without question now hesitated, questioned, and compared notes. I watched from the sidelines, careful not to appear aggressive or vindictive. My goal wasn't to humiliate him, but to reveal the truth quietly, allowing his own actions to speak for themselves. Every interaction I had was strategic. By asking the right questions and pointing out subtle truths, I let the weight of evidence build naturally in the minds of those around him. Ronan remained unaware of what was happening. He continued to project confidence and control, but cracks had begun to show. Stories he had repeated countless times no longer aligned with reality, and people began to doubt him without my needing to force the issue. It was empowering to watch. His influence weakened while I stayed calm and composed, never raising my voice or showing anger. The process felt like turning the tide without confrontation, like reclaiming control in a way he could neither predict nor defend against. For the first time, I felt the power of subtle strategy, and I knew I was finally gaining the upper hand. I invited my father and a few close family members to a small dinner, presenting it as an attempt to reconcile after the wedding chaos. The room was calm, the atmosphere polite, but I had already prepared for what was coming. My father arrived, expecting a friendly conversation, unaware that this would be the moment his patterns of manipulation would be exposed. I began carefully, recounting incidents without anger, letting the facts speak for themselves. I presented the evidence I had gathered over weeks, documents, letters, and testimonies from people who had witnessed his interference firsthand. Each item I shared revealed a deliberate pattern of control, deception, and sabotage that went far beyond my wedding day. My father tried to respond, brushing things off, claiming misunderstandings and insisting his intentions were always pure. But this time, he could not hide behind excuses. Each story I told was corroborated by others in the room. Friends and relatives quietly confirmed my accounts, adding their own experiences, their voices aligning to create an undeniable truth. The shift in the room was palpable. His confident facade faltered, and for the first time I saw hesitation, discomfort, and frustration in his eyes. No longer could he dismiss what was being presented. Every lie and act of interference was now visible, documented, and verified by witnesses who had silently suffered under his control. I remained composed throughout, speaking calmly and deliberately. I didn't need to attack him with anger. The evidence, the witnesses, and the clarity of truth did it all for me. By the end of the evening, the balance had changed. The control he had long exercised over me and others had been exposed, leaving him to confront the consequences of his actions without my having to raise my voice or lose my dignity. A few weeks later, our extended family gathered for a celebration. The atmosphere was light, laughter and chatter filling the room, but beneath it, the tension from past events lingered. I knew this would be the moment to see how the truth would settle among everyone. Without raising my voice or drawing attention to myself, I shared stories and updates from my life, mentioning moments that indirectly revealed the reality of my father's interference. I spoke about decisions I had made independently, achievements I had earned on my own, and relationships I had nurtured without anyone's control. Each story highlighted my growth and success while subtly pointing to the obstacles my father had tried to impose. Guests began to notice, exchanging quiet glances and whispers. Those who had seen his manipulations firsthand looked at him with new understanding. His past attempts to control events were now clear in their minds. He shifted in his chair, trying to maintain composure, but the realization of how others perceived him was evident. He had no explanation, no charm left to cover the cracks. I didn't gloat or lash out. My approach was deliberate, calm, composed, and dignified. The truth itself did the work. Each subtle acknowledgement from family and friends reinforced my position without me needing to attack him directly. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted. People treated me with respect, admiring my patience, courage, and clarity. The power balance had changed without any drama or anger. My father's credibility had quietly eroded, and I had shown that strength could be demonstrated through composure and evidence rather than confrontation. In that moment, I understood that living well and maintaining dignity could be the most effective form of vindication. Later that evening, Liam and I sat together quietly, away from the crowd. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, and I finally allowed myself to speak openly. I told him about the confusion, the pain, and the disappointment I had felt for years, and especially after the wedding incident. We talked about trust, how I had struggled to trust my father, and how his actions had shaken my sense of security. We spoke of betrayal, the kind that cuts deep because it comes from someone who should have been your strongest supporter. I let myself show vulnerability, admitting the sadness I felt for a man who had shaped my life yet cost me so much heartache. At the same time, I acknowledged to Liam that my happiness had to come first. I couldn't let past family patterns dictate my decisions or hold me back any longer. For the first time, I recognized that prioritizing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I needed to protect the life I was building, the marriage I cherished, and the peace I had fought so hard to regain. As I spoke, a sense of release washed over me. I felt the pressure I had carried for years, guilt, doubt, and the constant need to please others, start to lift. It was as if a heavy curtain had been pulled back, revealing clarity and freedom I hadn't known I could feel. In Liam's quiet presence, I experienced an emotional payoff I hadn't thought possible. The storm of feelings that had raged inside me began to settle. I understood that the burden of my father's choices no longer belonged to me, and with that realization came a deep, liberating sense of peace. For the first time, I felt truly free. Despite everything, my father tried, in small ways, to interfere again. He offered advice on my plans, hinted at doubts, and attempted to sway people around me. But this time, his efforts didn't work. I had learned to see through his manipulations, and I no longer let his opinions dictate my choices or shake my confidence. Finally, Liam and I arranged our wedding privately, away from the crowd and the tension of past events. Only those who genuinely supported us were present. The day was simple, warm, and filled with true joy. Every smile, every word, and every gesture reflected love and commitment, not control or interference. It was a stark contrast to the chaos my father had caused before. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction watching the day unfold exactly as I wanted. There were no public confrontations, no raised voices, just quiet affirmation of the life Liam and I were building together. The atmosphere was calm, intimate, and sincere, proof that happiness doesn't require validation from those who seek to control you. Meanwhile, my father's influence over my life and relationships dwindled naturally. People began noticing his past behavior, and his attempts to dominate or manipulate others no longer carried weight. Without any direct retaliation from me, his authority and presence in family matters weakened on its own. In that quiet space of independence and clarity, I thrived. I could focus on my marriage, my goals, and the relationships that mattered, free from his interference. The best revenge wasn't loud or dramatic, it was living fully, authentically, and with resilience. As my life flourished, my father's power diminished, and I realized that the most effective way to reclaim control was simply to live well on my own terms. Over time, Liam and I created a life that was entirely our own. We moved forward with confidence, making decisions together, building a home, and celebrating small victories every day. The sense of freedom and partnership was unlike anything I had experienced before. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been stifled for years. I kept polite and respectful contact with my family. There was no need for anger or ongoing conflict, but I also stopped protecting them from the outcomes of their choices. If mistakes were made, they faced them directly. I had learned that carrying the weight of others' actions only held me back. Letting go of that responsibility was both liberating and empowering. With each passing day, I grew more certain that my happiness and independence were the most important measures of success. Liam and I thrived, not because we proved anything to anyone, but because we focused on building a life full of trust, love, and mutual respect. Looking back, I realized that the greatest form of revenge was not confrontation or humiliation, it was simply living well, authentically, and without compromise. By thriving on my own terms, I demonstrated strength far more powerful than anger could ever achieve. The people who doubted or tried to manipulate me were no longer central to my story. My focus was on growth, joy, and the future I had chosen. I carried no resentment, only clarity. Sometimes, the quietest victories are the most meaningful, and I understood that fully now. I had finally stepped into a life that belonged to me, a life where betrayal could no longer hold me back, and where peace and fulfillment were my own to enjoy.